Hey, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. We are Movie versus Film, a film education and movie review channel. My name is Robert Bellissimo, and I'm very excited and happy today to have filmmaker Nancy Buirski, who has directed The Loving Story, Afternoon of a Faun, the Rape of Reese Taylor, and most recently, A Crime on the Bayou, and of course, by Sidney Lumet, about one of the greatest, in my opinion, one of the greatest American filmmakers of all time. Nancy, yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Robert. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. I wanted to start off because I know that David Anker at American Masters series, he did these interviews in 2008 with the intent of turning it into a documentary. And then when he passed away in 2014, they offered it to you. Now, I read that you had said you were a fan of Sidney Lumet's work. But what was the moment you decided that you wanted to take this on?
First of all, his name is Daniel Anker. And
Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel. Got that wrong.
No, it's fine. He was a friend of mine, but I just want to acknowledge him because he was such a good filmmaker, and we were all so sorry when he passed away.
Yeah.
So it was quite an honor to have American Masters, at the time, Michael Cantor, suggested I take a look at the interview and see if I wanted to make this film. And what was most important, the interview was wide-ranging. I think Danny and his crew spent 2 or 3 days with Sidney Lumet, and it covered everything. And I felt like I needed to find a story. I needed to find what was the driving issues in the interview, what was the through line of the interview that would help me tell a story and not just do a biopic of Sidney Lumet. There are many opportunities to do that, and there had already been, short documentaries on Sidney Lumet. This was an interview that was done close to the end of his life. And I figured that this would be an opportunity. He would have taken the opportunity to look back and think about the work he did. And if I could find something that connected his life to his work, and it was not just a linear story about he grew up here, he lived here, he did that, that it would have some further meaning to him and then to us, then I wanted to do it. And I did find it in this interview. That was what was so exciting. I did find something that I could connect his life to his work and be able to make a film that told us something about what mattered to Sidney Lumet.
Yeah, and I've seen it 4 or 5 times now. I just really absolutely draws you in, and I think you really found that because it has these bookends of starting with him witnessing this gang rape in Calcutta and not doing anything about it out of fear that they could kill him, and was he willing to die to stand up for what's clearly wrong? And the answer was no, but and then it ends again where he's talking about that. So was the intent of that, because then everything that followed was very much him talking about how a lot of his films were about people standing up for injustices and things that he valued, and he loved rebels and he loved mavericks, and his life growing up poor in Lower East Side and seeing people all taking care of each other, working together. So was that really the through line? Was how much individuality mattered to him, and morals and doing the right thing? Did you feel that was what you were after?
Well, that you've just explained that basically the whole film, absolutely, and I'm glad that came through so strongly to you.
Yeah,
I don't know if I would have made the film if I hadn't found that key moment in his life. And I should mention that he had never talked about that before. To my knowledge, that was the first time he discussed that horrible incident on the train that he witnessed, and I knew that I needed to present that as a dilemma for him. And we actually don't answer the question until the end of the film, when he says, I wrestled with what to do.
Right.
And at the end of the film, he admits that he did nothing. But he also admits that had he done anything, he would have been killed. There was no way he was going to do what his characters in his movies do. And he distinguishes real life from movies to say that those in the movies can stand up and do these things that in real life would have put him in mortal danger. And I just thought that was so gripping. And the other thing he says early in the film, and an important piece of the puzzle, is that he's not making the moral message, that he contends that he's not making films to moralize, to teach, to tell us the difference between right and wrong. But of course, that's exactly what he's done. All his films, ones that have stood the test of time, do tell us that a person who stands up for what is right, a person who maintains their individuality, a person who cares about what is fair in life, that's what makes a good life. He says that in relationship to the character in 12 Angry Men.
Right.
And he moves right on through that to, Serpico and Prince of the City. And The Verdict is a very important example of that.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the film, we kind of have him admitting that that is in fact what he's been doing, even though he contends in the beginning of the film that that is never what he's been doing. He's really just working. It's an interesting kind of dialectic that he sets up. That is this about work or is this about a message? Well, in fact, it's about both.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's always something, as someone who's been such a fan of Lumet for so long, I think that's why I was always so drawn to his work of people, risking everything in order to, do the right thing. But you chose these perfect moments to cut to when he's the film in his films when he's talking, like, just off the top of my head, like towards the end where you cut to Daniel, the film Daniel, as he's leaving the bus and clearly is about to get killed. And, it's just, it was also like when he's talking about rebels and radicals, and then boom, it was Howard Beale with the I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I mean, how did you find, out of 40 plus films, I mean, how did you find just the right pieces to cut to? Was it a mixture of instinct or, what emotionally hit you? Because for me, they hit so emotionally on what he was saying.
Thank you. I mean, that was the fun of making the movie, really. When Michael Cantor asked me if I wanted to make this film, I remember thinking, well, gee, I will spend the next month or two watching every film that Sidney Lumet ever made. That's a nice thing to have to do. I like that idea. And so I did. I watched them in chronological order, and those moments absolutely stuck with me. I was sitting in an edit with my editor, Anthony Rapoli, for many, many weeks. And we would basically, I rarely put anything down on paper when I'm constructing a film. It's usually coming out in my head. And as these ideas are beginning to form in the film, I'm remembering those scenes. And those scenes just really spoke to me. And it's also, which is at the tail that wags the dog, the scenes themselves also reminded me what was important to Sidney Lumet, because these are the scenes that come through so strongly. These are the things that we remember over time. So, as much as he argues that he didn't care about those issues, those scenes tell us otherwise.
Oh, no, yeah, without a doubt. I don't know if just in the chat box, Linda Daly is saying, Nancy, please put a light on that face. You're in the dark. I don't know if that's someone but there's some direction from someone in the chat.
Thank you.
In the chat box. Outside of seeing all his films again, and even some of his work on TV and the interviews, was there any other research you did outside of that of those interviews and the films?
Well, I did the kind of reading that anyone would normally do when making a film. There are a number of really good books out about Sidney Lumet, and in fact, a new book came out after I made the film by Maura Siegel on Sidney Lumet, which is an excellent resource for people who are interested in him. But the book,
great.
The book that probably informed me the most is Sidney Lumet's book called Making Movies. He wrote a book, I think it's in 1994. Yeah. And he talks about his process, and he talks about what's important.
Got it here in case anyone's interested. Yeah, it's a great book.
And he's that book he's so candid. This is one of the beautiful things about Sidney Lumet. He's utterly honest, very candid about his work. He doesn't hold back. It's like a magician who's showing you his, the tricks to his trade. He's happy to share them. And so that informed me quite a bit.
Was anything with his did you ever talk to his family, or was that mainly after the film was done?
After. I mean, yes, I talked with them before, and I certainly had the permission to make the film. But I really wanted, I wanted this film to be Sidney Lumet speaking to us. And because that interview was so extensive, it wasn't me telling us about Sidney Lumet. It was Sidney Lumet telling us about Sidney Lumet. I've tended to do this in all my work, where I don't have an omniscient narrator. I don't impose myself to the extent possible. When I'm making these movies, I really want the characters to reveal themselves in my films. So this was a perfect opportunity because he's so forthcoming. He's so honest.
He was, yeah, and he's such a great storyteller. Like he's so engaging. Like there's hours of him on YouTube talking, and I could just put it on and listen to him, no matter if he's talking about his TV days or his film days. But no, it's quite an emotional film too. It's quite, like you said, it's not a traditional biopic. It's just really kind of goes at the spine or the heart of what mattered to him, as you said, and his work. What was there when you were watching those 40 plus films? Which films to you do you think are essential viewing for maybe filmmakers or film lovers?
I think almost everyone that's in our film. Because there are many more. I don't remember how many films we have in our movie, but there are
just
many.
Over 20, 21.
Right, so that's less than half of his output.
Right.
So there's something valuable, I believe, in every film that we chose to reveal. And let's remember, not all of them were hits at the time. Like The Wiz was not well received. But I think if you look at it today, you'll see some incredibly important moments and beautiful filmmaking. I'm trying to remember some of the others that didn't do too well. I mean, the first film that really did, 12 Angry Men did extremely well. But after that, some of the films did better than others. The film that was recognized widely years later was The Pawnbroker. I think that's the first film that Sidney Lumet is, I think he wins a Directors Guild Award for that. Then there are other films later on that did not do particularly well, but he considers very important, like Daniel. That's one of his favorite films, and Running on Empty. Two films that have very similar themes, but that's an interesting thing to think about as a filmmaker, that just because your film is not received well at the time doesn't mean that it's not going to last and have meaning for you and hopefully for the audience as they go back and revisit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a film I love, which he's, again, really exploring the relationship with family and fathers and sons. And he talks in the documentary about his father, but you mentioned that he shied away from his mother or his sister a lot in the interviews. Did anyone ever maybe mention as to why that may have been? Or I guess it's hard to know, right?
It is hard to know, because when Daniel Anker asked him a question that he didn't want to answer, he simply didn't answer it.
Okay.
Yeah, they asked him questions about, he's married 4 times.
Right.
And they asked him those questions. He said he didn't want to talk about it, that wasn't what mattered to him.
Right.
So I respected that. I saw no reason to go into material that he wasn't interested in. One of the things, getting back to his honesty, that comes out in his book, it made me think when I was preparing for this interview today, that Sidney Lumet's honesty is part of his moral compass. The morality that does get revealed in his films has to do with honesty and as we've already said, fairness. But Sidney Lumet was not a liar. He didn't dissemble. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't make something more out of himself, his life, or his films than what he really believed. And I think that is, I find that very inspiring, because we're working in an industry that puts stock in imagination, right, and fantasy and making things up. And Sidney told stories that were real. And in fact, he called them, referred to naturalism as compared to reality. And I think that's a big part of who he is as a person and also as a filmmaker.
And it's interesting that he was able to do that while also being, very, very entertaining at the same time. And I imagine maybe from his theater work, the way from the group theater and the way those plays were written to be, let's take things from life, but put it into a heightened situation. I imagine that had a real influence on his structure and the way he felt was the best way to tell a story where it's entertaining yet emotional and makes you think. Like it's quite something, because I think to do all that is very hard.
Well, it goes back to what he said in the beginning of my film and what I mentioned earlier, that he also, as important as these messages were, he saw this as a job. I mean, he was a working filmmaker, what we call a journeyman filmmaker. And that's why he turned out a film almost every year. And so, yes, he grew up first in Yiddish theater. And then by the time he was 11 years old, he was on Broadway. And he was an actor for many years before he was a director. When I say he grew up in the theater, I should emphasize that he was acting on stage. And then he continued to be involved with theater and actors. You're right, he was part of group theater, and then he became, I think he was in Sandy Meisner's acting studio. And he created an acting studio too that, he actually got kicked out of Meisner's studio and created his own studio.
The Actors Workshop, I think it was called.
Yeah. And so he is incredibly involved in the acting process. And in fact, he rehearsed his actors, for his films, he rehearsed them for days before they went in front of a camera. It's one reason he could shoot so quickly, because they were so well rehearsed that he didn't have to do multitude of takes. So, this was about making movies, and movies should be entertaining as far as he was concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on a lot of the man himself, but was there anything that after the film was done, you felt, what the essence of this man, who he really was, something that stood out to you the most about his main qualities?
I think it's what we've been talking about here. The honesty, the generosity, as I say, not only in the writing of his book, but in how he talks about his work. And the work itself is, well, frankly, it's brilliant. I mean, almost every film has something that's worth looking at. He was technically very adept. He was in control of everything when he was making his movies, from the lighting to what lens was going to be used on the camera to the production design. Even though he had people who were responsible for those things, because he grew up not only in theater but also in live television. He made the transition from theater to filmmaking first by working in live television, and then film television like Playhouse 90, et cetera, et cetera. So he was schooled in a very rapid and pressurized environment. Live television, you didn't get a chance to do another take. That's what went on the air. So he knew his business, he knew his craft.
And it's so rare nowadays. I know myself, like working in the film and TV, you barely get a rehearsal, right? It's just let's go. So the fact that he would rehearse for 2 weeks, like a play, really, and then everyone was so, confident in what they were doing that 2 or 3 takes at most, I believe most of the time. So. Which is so, I don't think anyone does nowadays. Quite extraordinary. I was also curious because I saw in the end credits that Martin Scorsese was an advisor on this, and I never picked up on that before. What exactly did he do on this?
He was an advisor. He looked at the cuts and he gave me notes. And he's been very helpful to me in a number of films, and I was very, very grateful to have him advise us on this one.
How did he come into it? Did you know him already, or did someone
Yeah,
refer?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite, because I know he's a big fan, so I'm sure he had a.
He was a big fan of Sidney Lumet. That I should emphasize. He was really, he encouraged me to make the film, and he was a big fan of his.
Yeah, I bet. And Walter Bernstein, was he's associate producer, I believe, right, on this film?
Yes. He passed away quite recently.
Yeah.
And he was one of the many writers who was on the blacklist. And Sidney Lumet was one of the first people to work with him using his name. Walter Bernstein wrote The Front, you may remember. That was
Martin Ritt.
With Woody Allen, where we see how writers would disguise themselves, writers who were on the blacklist would use another name to front their work and be able to sell their work. And that actually happened. And this was basically what Bernstein did. And Sidney Lumet was one of the first people to use him using his name. So Walter Bernstein and Sidney Lumet were very good friends. They remained very close over the years. And they basically, they went through the crucible together.
Mm. How did you get access to some of his live TV shows? Because I know that you cut to that a few times. Was that easy to find, or was that also given to you?
The Paley Center for Media and Television is a wonderful resource for everything TV. And
great.
I recommend people turn to that whenever they need something like that. I'm quite sure that that's probably where that footage came from.
Oh, I see. Okay. And I know that if anyone is interested, one of the A Tragedy in a Temporary Town is on the Criterion of 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
Which is really, really great with Lloyd Bridges. And the other one was Crime in the Streets with Cassavetes that Lumet directed, which you can get on this DVD. Television's Lost Classics, if anyone's interested. And someone from Columbia University Narrative Medicine was asking about Running on Empty, question mark. So I imagine that person, I had the DVD, I dropped it somewhere, I guess, but that's with Judd Hirsch and River Phoenix, which is from 1980.
Christine
Yes, that's from 1989, and it's a really great film about a family on the run, and very emotionally gripping. I really, really, really love that movie as well.
It's a film, if I might add, that it's a film that Sidney Lumet he really wanted to make it because the film of Daniel had not done particularly well.
Right.
And the theme that he wanted to examine, which we bring out in our film, was how do children pay for the passions of the parents?
Yeah.
And in both cases, these parents are radicals. And they are being, in the Book of Daniel, this is based on Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. And the children do pay the price for what their parents did. And we see the same thing in Running on Empty. So it's also Sidney Lumet dealing with some important issues of radicalism, and particularly radicalism on the left as compared to the right. And the two are very similar in theme, and he cared enormously about both of those films.
I often wonder, I remember when I first saw this, I remember Trump had just taken office, and I remember in the documentary he mentions that this country is so capable of a strong right wing, and I can't help but wonder what he would think of today. I don't know if that's ever popped into your head, Nancy.
I think it's part of what drove Sidney Lumet from the time he was a child. He grew up on the Lower East Side, and his parents, most of the community, the Jewish community down there was pretty left of center. And he joined into protests when he was a child with his parents. And they were intellectuals, and they were kind of lefties. And so, though he didn't continue protesting, he put his protests into his films. He's the first one to admit that he didn't do what a lot of other filmmakers did, going down to Selma, for instance, during the civil rights movement. But he feels like he made his statements in his films.
Yeah, no, I mean, they definitely come through. I just wanted to go back in your life a bit, because I know you were a photographer at the New York Times and a photo editor. And how long were you working there?
I had a good long stint. I wasn't a photographer for the New York Times. I was a photo editor, but I did get hired as someone who had done photo editing and photography at Magnum Photos. So I went from Magnum to the New York Times, and then I left about 10 years later, and I started a film festival in North Carolina called Full Frame.
Right. Were you doing photography at a young age? Was that something you were doing from the time in your 20s, or when did that start?
No, I actually started as a painter, and then I moved very quickly into photography. When I actually needed to do a little work, and I got a job at Magnum, and I was hired as a photo editor. And it wasn't before long that someone put a camera in my hands, and I was, as they say, the rest was history. I just loved it. And so I started photographing, and I continued doing my own work, my personal photography, while I was keeping these jobs, the Magnum job and the New York Times. I published a book of photographs while I was at the Times on migrant children called.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, Earth Angels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And where can people find that book? Because it seems really interesting.
And thank you. It was published by. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the name of the publisher, but they could probably find it on eBay.
Okay.
I think you can find it there.
Okay, I'll have a look. If I can put the link in the description box once I find it for anyone who may be interested. And of course, your first film from 2011, the Loving Story. What brought you to become a filmmaker 10 years ago?
Well, I was actually, I started The Loving Story in about 2008 or 2009, and it came out in 2011. And I had just stepped down from my role as the director of the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival, and had wanted very much to return to my. Not that running a film festival isn't creative; it is very, very creative work. But I wanted to focus solely on creative work now, and I was missing the photography. I was missing the painting, and I felt like after spending 10 years looking at documentary films and running that festival, I might be in a position to begin making my own films. With the photography background and the curatorial work that I had done, I was ready, I felt. But I wasn't sure, and I actually thought I would start producing The Loving Story when I came across Mildred Loving's story when she died. I came across her obituary. But soon after, as I began to produce, I began to realize that I really had creative things I wanted to say, that I wasn't in a position I didn't want to turn it over to another director. I really wanted to direct it myself. And I partnered with a wonderful producer and editor named Elizabeth Haviland James. And she helped guide me through the making of my first film. And that's what I did. I was very fortunate to have come across such an important story. At the end of the day, it's about the story.
Yeah.
As well as the filmmaking.
Right. Absolutely. I just wanted to cut in. If anyone watching, if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment box, and when I find a good moment, I'll ask Nancy for you. Is it a coincidence that a lot of your subject matter seems to be connected to a lot of what Sidney Lumet was talking about in terms of people fighting for injustice and where it may end in death, just from looking at the rape of Reese Taylor, and even your new one, Crime on the is it Bayou? Am I saying that right?
Crime on the Bayou. Crime on the Bayou. The Louisiana.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was reading the plot, and I watched the trailer, and yeah, there definitely seems to be that connection. Is that a coincidence, or did you already know that maybe before you were filmmaking that you were interested in similar things as Sidney was?
I don't think that I intentionally set out to make films the way about
right.
the same kind of with the same moral message that Sidney Lumet did. But as I look back on them, and I was thinking about this preparing for your interview today, I couldn't help but notice that many of these people do stand up for what is right.
Yeah.
You know, many of them are you know, fighting corrupt systems and fighting for what they feel is right, and very often in the process fighting for their lives. So, you know, I do believe that there is a through line in this work, and it's exciting to think about. But I think it's, you know, just as Sidney Lumet says, you know, you make your film and you tell your story, and if the moral message is there, it will come out. I do think that I set out to tell these people's story and help them tell their story. I hope that that's what comes through, and I think that kind of understanding what makes a good life, as Sidney said about that gentleman in the 12 Angry Men, what makes a good life is your individuality and your ability to stand up against forces of evil and corruption. So that's a long way of saying yes. I'm happy that's what comes through. Did I set out to do it intentionally? I'm not sure, but I'm now much more conscious of that as a theme in my work.
Right, absolutely. Were you a rebel growing up, or a maverick, or?
No, not at all. And I think that that's interesting, because I think that that's the part of me that's come out in the work. I was a good girl. I was well behaved. You know, I wasn't. You know, I cared about these issues. I was very conscious of what was going on in the world, but I don't think that I didn't get in much trouble. So I guess this is the ways, as John Lewis would say, this is maybe a good kind of trouble to get into.
Yeah, a creative one, I suppose.
Right. You know,
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think there's another film that we haven't talked about, and that's Afternoon of a Faun.
Yes.
That deals with a ballet dancer who is a beautiful ballet dancer named Tanaka Leclerc, who is stricken with polio at the height of her career. And, you know, she has to ask herself when she can no longer dance again, because her sense of self came from dancing, and it came from, you know, how she used her body. And now she could no longer move. So she has to ask herself at the end of this film, who am I? And I think that's another thing that connects all these films, that just as she's asking herself because she can no longer do what she used to do, I think these people, whether it's Mildred Loving or Reese Taylor or Gary Duncan, our subject in A Crime on the Bayou, at the point when they have an important decision to make about whether they're going to stand up for what's right, they're also asking themselves, who am I?
That's a good point. Yeah, I just finished that, and that Afternoon of a Faun, and I really another thing I took from it is that it's, you know, I think people have things happen to them. So, you know, everyone has perhaps bad things happen to them, and then where they, you know, why me, and to hold on to perhaps the anger of that, which of course I can understand, and then how does one come to terms with such a drastic change of the self and who they are? And I thought that was a real beautiful message that came through, because she, you know, they like in the documentary that they said she would only live till 40, and she lived till 80. You 70. Know, which is was it 70? Okay,
right. But it was still highly unusual that she lived that long. You know?
Which is quite remarkable. But just to then teach and work and still find a way to use her passion, and I thought that was quite beautiful. And I think everybody can perhaps relate to a dream not working out, or a dream falling flat, or so I thought that I just really enjoyed it. So she's a very beautiful woman. It's very distinctive looking as well. I just thought it was a really wonderful film. I'm really looking forward to seeing the other ones as well. And Loving, of course, was turned into a feature film. I remember when that came out. which looks really good. So I'll have to find that. What are you and what are you working on now? You have a Crime on the Bayou is out, right? Or is it not out
No,
yet?
it won't be released until July. So
Okay.
we're just finishing it up, and we're putting all those last pieces together. We're finishing the film and working with Shout Factory, a wonderful distributor, to release the film. So we're very excited about that. And, I encourage people to come on to that Facebook page and Twitter and follow what's going to happen with that film. We're really excited about next steps with that film. I should mention, by the way, that Loving came out the same year as by Sidney Lumet. So that was a pretty exciting year for our team.
Oh, I bet.
To be releasing both of those. I was a producer on Loving, and that film is directed by Jeff Nichols, and it's really a beautiful film with Ruth Negga and Joel Edgerton. So they did wonderful, translation, moving from the documentary, using the documentary as some kind of inspiration and making that incredible narrative film, Loving. And, that's exactly what I'm trying to do now with Afternoon of a Faun. I very much want to see that turned into a narrative film. I've written a script, and we're just starting development. The script is, it's just a draft, but we're hoping that we'll continue working on the script, and we'll eventually get that film out into the world. So that's one of the things I'm working on, and starting to think about other documentaries. There's an animated feature that I've been working on for many years called Endangered. And that deals with a young girl and her relationship to a bonobo in Congo, based on an incredible book by Elliot Schrafer called Endangered. So there are a number of things in the hopper, and I'm not sure exactly which one is going to take precedent, but it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you about that, because Afternoon of a Faun, I can definitely see that as a narrative. So that's really exciting to see. Who are some directors that influenced you the most?
Oh gosh, really,
I know that's a tough one, but
it is a tough one, and I feel like I shouldn't go there because it depends on the day.
Right, that's true.
I look at movies all the time. I'm a film geek, and there are so many that excite me, and I think I can't go there. There are too many.
Fair enough. There was a question from Charles Goldberg. I don't know if you would maybe know this, but he was asking what Lumet thought of Scorsese, if you happen to know anything about that.
I do not. I'm sorry. I have no idea.
I do know, Charles, that he loved Raging Bull. I know he really loved that. And I don't recall what else he thought of Scorsese, but I know he was a big fan. But I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find some different comments about that. Is there any advice you have for people who want to become a filmmaker?
That's such a good question. I think making films, this is not easy, by the way, and no matter where we are in the culture, it never gets easier. But it does feel easier if you're making a film that is personal and close to your heart. And it doesn't mean it's about you, but where you feel a connection to the subject matter, where you feel a connection to the individuals, what they're striving for, even this kind of ephemeral idea of who am I? How do I find myself in all of this? Those are things that meant something to me. And so whenever I would start to get a little bit, you're dealing with an uphill battle, you're going to get financing, or, people are going to like your film. If you really feel a connection to it, you feel what the film is about matters, then it gets you up the next day to work on it. So that would be my first piece of advice. And then work with a wonderful team. I'm very fortunate to have a team that I work with, Susan Margolin and Claire Chandler and Vanessa Martino and Anthony Rupoli and people that have come on to executive produce my films have all been so supportive and makes one feel, not alone. It really is a collaborative effort, and sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable being the only one being interviewed because so many other people have contributed to the work.
Right.
And that's so important. Find the team that you work well with and try to eliminate as much tension as you can. There's enough tension in making a movie to not have tension within your community. And I'm very fortunate to have that.
That's very, very, very well said. Do you think that if someone wants to be either a photographer or a filmmaker, do you think formal training is important, or should one just pick up a camera and go?
There are pitfalls. Listen, formal training never hurts.
Right.
But I didn't have any of it. I wasn't formally trained as a photographer, and I wasn't formally trained as a filmmaker. There are many times when I regret it. I wish I had all the technical expertise that Sidney Lumet had, for instance. When he went on a set, as I said, he knew what lens to use. He knew every technical component in making a film. But on the other hand, you can get wed to that, and you can become afraid of breaking rules. When you're formally trained, there are guidelines and rules that are communicated to you, and you can become uncomfortable moving outside of that. But if you've not come up with a whole set of rules in your head, then you just do what feels natural to you. And you learn along the way, and that's very exciting. So I'm not sure I can tell you which is better. I can tell you it worked out all right for me. It did make me very often uncomfortable because there are certain things that I didn't know enough about, but I had other people around me that did. And I guess my formal training was in my life experiences. But I must say that, having been a photographer certainly did inform my filmmaking. I not only knew how to use a camera, but I knew how to see. And I knew, and that also came from painting. So all of these things feed into each other. So I don't think anybody should be concerned about past experience not nurturing the current work. I think that it almost always does if you're open to it.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned painting and photography and filmmaking, it makes me curious. Were you from an artistic family? Was that something encouraged growing up?
My mother had skills as a painter and as a drawer. She didn't do it professionally. And my sisters both have it. So I think there's something in the DNA that exists, but my father made toilet paper. I mean, what can I tell you?
Right. Oh, okay, great. And there's a question from Dr. Mark A. Wias asking why do you prefer doing documentary films?
As compared to narrative films?
I imagine that's what he means.
Go
ahead.
I would say that I don't prefer it. It's the way I got started. I had been, coming from the New York Times, where the packaging of information is so important, making sometimes difficult to understand information accessible was a hallmark of working at a very fine newspaper like the Times. And then moving into creating a documentary film festival schooled me in documentary. So that was the natural thing for me to do first. But as I mentioned, when I started The Loving Story, I was pitching the narrative film at the same time I was pitching the documentary. Not that I expected I would direct it, but I felt like if you have a great story, it can take almost any form. I mean, it could have been too as well.
That's true.
So, I am very excited about transitioning into narrative film, and hopefully we'll make Afternoon in A Faun into what we're calling Tanning, because that was Tannikill Leclerc's nickname. So, I'm also working on another script. It's all very creative for me, and a way of expressing a story that has some value and a story that I feel close to. So I'm happy to tackle any form. I don't want to be arrogant about it, though. I am daunted and terrified of the first day I go on set to make a narrative film. But I'll try to do it because I love the form.
Very well said. And I know that by Sidney Lumet, people can find on Amazon, iTunes, Kanopy, and there also is in Facebook and Twitter page for that. And I'll leave that in the description box below. Are your other films also on those same streaming services, like Loving Story and
The Loving Story is on HBO Max. And,
HBO Max.
And The Rape of Reese Taylor can be found on Stars and Hulu.
Okay.
And what am I leaving out? By Sidney Lumet is on Amazon, and Afternoon of a Faun is on Amazon. I don't know about Kanopy. They also can be found on iTunes. Both, I should mention, right. The Afternoon of a Faun and The Rape of Reese and Sidney Lumet, by Sidney Lumet, were American Masters.
Right.
They were my co-producers on those films, and The Loving Story was co-produced by HBO. And The Rape of Reese Taylor had a number of other co-producers, but they weren't platforms, and so that was licensed by Stars and has been relicensed by them along with Hulu. So I'm very fortunate to have these films available. But I hope people will come onto our website, which is augustafilms.com, where we can direct them to more resources for them. Can I go back to the question about narrative filmmaking?
Yes, absolutely.
I also just want to say that I believe that documentaries, and I'm not in any way critical of documentaries that are more informative than mine, that are a little bit more educational. Mine tend to lean into the story itself, and I tend to emphasize the narrative arc in the story. So in a funny way, I feel like I've been kind of migrating into narrative filmmaking while I was making documentaries. I'm very interested in the mood of the story and the place that the story takes place in, as well as the individual who the story is about. And I find that a real challenge, but I like to immerse people in that place and that time and that mood so that they are feeling what our subjects are feeling and not just garnering information about their challenge. And their challenges are very strong and the information is important. So to me, it's an exciting challenge to weave that together, to weave that, their story and the atmosphere of that story, the way the story is told, so that people feel the emotional resonance of what they've gone through. So I'm not sure I'm always successful, but that's a real goal, and it does tie the not documentary with the scripted form together in a way that I'm enjoying.
Yeah, no, very, very well said, and that's often what we explore on our YouTube podcast here is the difference in storytelling, and when are you just kind of connecting the dots, and it's easy to watch, and then when are you really feeling it, and what are the differences and how that is communicated, and of course from the two films of yours I've seen so far, and I'm definitely going to see the others. They definitely the emotional life of the characters definitely grabs you and puts you right there. So which is the kind of films I love. So and AugustaFilms.com, I will also leave that in the description box for people to check out. And this has been great, Nancy. I've really enjoyed having you on to talk about a passion of mine, Sidney Lumet, and his great films. I'd love to have you back to talk about all of them more in depth, because I'm looking forward to seeing the rest.
Well, I'd love to be back. It's been a really wonderful conversation.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for everyone who was watching and leaving your comments and questions in the chat box. Please, if you haven't already done so, there's a subscribe button right next to the description box below. You can click on that and then click the bell, and you'll get a notification every time we release one of our new videos or go live like we are today. Thank you again, Nancy. Thanks so much, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you.